I'm happy to introduce our current panel. It's the last panel of the conference. It's called Education to Employment in Quebec's English-Speaking Communities. Despite high levels of educational attainment, English speakers in Quebec continue to face employment challenges as a linguistic group. This panel will explore the relationship between education and employment for Quebec's English speakers and what solutions can be deployed to address existing challenges and barriers. And I would like to thank PERT for bringing up this important topic and assembling these illustrious speakers today. So I'll start with my opening remarks. First, I would like to welcome our panelists. They are Christine Grenier, Center Coordinator, Anchor Academic and Vocational Education Center. Hi, Christine. John Davids, Research Coordinator, Black Community Resource Center, BCRC. Adrienne Winrow, Executive Director, Youth for Youth Quebec. I apologize for the cat noise. I'll close my door in a sec. Angela Stevens, Dean of Faculty, Professional Services and Continuing Education, CEGEP, Champlain, St. Lawrence. So hi there, Angela, and welcome everyone. So I will ask each panelist to introduce yourselves with one key question in mind. What is the reality for English-speaking students making the transition from education to employment in Quebec today? And we're going to start with Adrienne. And a reminder, Adrienne, you have a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Adrienne, have to unmute yourself.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Thanks to my co-panelists and for all the guests for being here. Thank you, Lorraine, for the introduction. My name is Adrienne. I'm the Executive Director of Youth for Youth Quebec. I've been serving the organization since 2019. Youth for Youth Quebec is a for youth by youth organization. Our board of directors is youth-led, has an average age of 25 years old, and they represent multiple regions of Quebec. Y4Y has given me and my colleagues the privilege of meeting English-speaking youth from across the province over time and understanding their diverse realities as a linguistic minority where they live. So I will say that it is hard to make large generalizations about this part of the population. However, I hope to raise some interesting points that we've learned from young people in consultation with them over time that will be relevant to this panel discussion. As for the question, I think there hasn't been much change in the reality of the fact that there is still this existential question for English-speaking youth of should I stay or should I go? English-speaking youth, although highly educated, great on paper, and in most cases hardworking as anybody else, as hardworking as anyone else, often face the reality that perhaps their confidence in their second language or third language or fourth language, depending on whom you're speaking with, may put them in a situation where they're deciding that they're not quite adequate to fulfill a position that might have a bilingual requirement. And whether or not this is true is something we can definitely debate, and I want to, but in the meantime, there are several realities that are particular to English-speaking youth, and then there are other realities that are not unique, that are common to youth who are entering the workforce, which is one of the most pivotal points in any person's life and beginning of their career. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Adrienne. I will now turn to Christine.
Hi, everyone.
If you would like to respond.
To respond, or do I?
Sorry, to say your piece. Yes, sorry.
Yes, okay. Thank you for the invite. I'm very happy to be here today. Actually, I run a little center, very small in a rural community in the Baie des Chaleurs region of the Gaspé Coast. I'm actually neighbor to one of your panelists yesterday, Alan Richards, which is down the road from each other. So I represent, a vulnerable population. Our reality is very different than a lot of other centers outside this region. The reality of the students leaving the education, going to the job market varies tremendously based on so many variables. Was there any French second language in the program they took? Some do, some don't. Do they have stages in their program? Some do, some don't. Having a stage will break a barrier already for them, just like having some French will break a barrier for them. Were they able to get an interview in their mother tongue in English? Again, that plays a huge role in whether or not they can get a job, right? Being in the region versus being in a city, again, big difference for those students. So there's so many variables that make it more or even or less difficult to transition from the program, from their certification to the job market. So that's my view on that.
Thank you. And you guys are great. You're on time, not only ready, but on time. That's makes my job a lot easier. We'll now turn to John Davids. And just to repeat the question for the audience, what is the reality for English-speaking students making the transition from education to employment in Quebec today? John? Can you unmute, John?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I just had the worst timing for a connection issue. But good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Lorraine, for introducing me. And thank you for all the co-panelists and all the audience members for being here, and to PERT as well for organizing this. My name is John Davids, and I'm the research coordinator at the Black Community Resource Center. We're a nonprofit organization based in Côte des Neiges, and we offer a wide range of programs and services to community members who are either part of the English-speaking Black community or not. I've been a researcher at the BCRC since 2020, and have a background in political science and in sociology. And I'm here today to offer my perspective based on some of the research I've conducted in my role with regards to education and employment. To address the question, in my perspective, the reality is that it's challenging for many young people to transition from their studies to employment for a wide variety of reasons, many of which aren't particularly unique to Quebec. For instance, the variety of employment opportunities in our market may not match the variety of programs and fields of study that students may have done or may have interest in. There are certain sectors or industries that are larger or more present in Quebec than others. And so based on what you've studied, your prospects for finding a job in the same field may be higher or lower. And there may also be pressure or temptation to look outside of the province for employment opportunities which match your field of study. So some of these things aren't particularly unique to Quebec. For me, however, what's also interesting are the changing economic and social conditions in our society. And to some degree, I find them to be rather unique. I find this time to be rather unique. There is a lot of economic uncertainty with trends such as the rising cost of living. Students today find themselves facing particular challenges that may not have been as apparent even just a few years ago. They may be more pressured to find employment to put food on their tables and not necessarily do something in their field. And also, in regards to the current context, we're also facing a labor shortage in this province across many areas. At the same time, we're seeing significant changes to language policy. The labor shortage may help in one's search for employment, with employers being increasingly pressured to find workers. But at the same time, language policies may make that search more difficult if they don't speak French at a level which is high enough for any given workplace. So these two forces or pressures, which anyone entering the labor market, particularly English speakers, it's something they have to be wary of and will have to navigate. So for me, that's to some degree the reality facing students who are or will be making the transition to the workforce.
Thank you very much, John. And Angela, last but not least, we'd like to hear your perspective on that question. Please unmute yourself. I don't hear Angela. Do people hear her? No.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Phew, sorry. I thought my settings were okay. So it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. Thank you very much for the invitation. As mentioned, my name is Angela Stevens. I'm the Dean of Faculty, Professional Services, and Continuing Education at CEGEP Champlain St. Lawrence. So CEGEP Champlain St. Lawrence is the only English-speaking CEGEP in the Quebec City region, but also in the eastern part of the province. We welcome students from the English-speaking high schools of our region and outside of the Quebec City region, and that makes up 25% of our student population. And we complete the rest of our student population with students from the French-speaking high schools. The total population of our college, we are small, as I mentioned, is approximately 950 students. So I know there are some secondary schools that are bigger than our CEGEP, but that is our reality. And this will be our official limit in the years coming with respect to the new charter of the French language, Law 14. So the reality, I think, and Adrienne and Christine, you touched on it as well, but the reality of our students at St. Lawrence making the transition to employability has to do with accessibility. And accessibility to programs, whether at whatever level of education they might be in their true field of interest, so they can build a career in a field and in an area that is going to be stimulating and motivating for them to continue. So given our size, we're limited in the diversity of programs that we can offer. We have to keep our programs viable, and therefore we're mainly a pre-university CEGEP with only one technical program. So since 2016, 86% of our English-speaking students, when they come to St. Lawrence, they are entering into the pre-university programs that we offer. And only 6.8% are applying into our technical program. 7% apply into our DEC pathway program. And DEC pathway, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, it allows students, normally it's one semester, it gives them an opportunity to explore a program. They're not sure what they want to do with the rest of their lives. So it gives them a semester or two to explore different courses from different programs, or maybe catch up on missing prerequisites that they might need. So during the same time period, what we've seen is that 41% of our students have graduated, the English-speaking population, 43 have dropped out or they've left St. Lawrence. And the balance are still here with us. The statistics are only from 2016. So some leave to be able to study in a particular technical program, whether that's in French or whether that's in English, and they move away from Quebec City, and some don't continue their studies at all. So I think that access to having education in their language of study that they're comfortable in, to remove some of those obstacles and barriers that I think it was Christine mentioned in terms of French, the language and the opportunities that can be provided with them. That's something that has a big impact on the transition for our students at the CEGEP level.
Thanks so much, Angela, and all the panelists for that first answer. I'm going to move to a new part of the panel now, and it's targeted questions. So we'll start with Adrienne. Adrienne, PERT's research shows that English-speaking youth face particular difficulties integrating in Quebec's labor market. What are some of the challenges that the youth face, and what are their current opportunities presented by Quebec's labor market?
Thank you for the question, Lorraine. I think that there are some challenges, as John mentioned, that are common to all youth, English speaking or otherwise. But I'll speak to a few of those challenges. We understand from our consultations with youth that often a young person who's at the university level, facing the prospect of graduation, the decision of whether to continue on to grad studies or to enter the labor market, often look at the jobs that are available and advertised online and think of themselves as not qualified, because often the list of qualifications and skills requirements are extensive on the jobs posted on LinkedIn, for example, or Indeed, and they don't see enough opportunity for entry-level jobs on the job market today. They consider themselves to have too few job experiences. And often that's true. Full-time study is full-time work. And also holding down a part-time job in spite of the economic pressures to do so is extremely difficult. It's ever been thus, but the pressure to also hold down a part-time job is often too much for the majority of students. However, there are internships. Universities are putting a great deal of effort into creating new internship opportunities for young people. However, the youth with whom we've consulted often find that the competition is fierce for those internships. So again, we see an opportunity for universities, and we know that they're working on it, to create more of these work study programs and learning opportunities for youth. Again, English-speaking youth reflect what many others feel, many others in the English-speaking community feel, which is a generalized anxiety over the political situation in Quebec, but a strong desire to remain in Quebec. Youth during their CEGEP and university years are building relationships, support systems of their own, friend groups and community, and economic considerations come into play as well. So the question of should I stay or should I go? The economic question wins out often because the cost of living elsewhere in Canada is so incredibly high. In terms of challenges, again, French language proficiency continues to be the greatest barrier to an English speaker's ability to find, maintain, and advance within the Quebec labor force. That said, there are some opportunities. Lorraine, you've got your hand up. Have I hit my 3 minutes to answer challenges and opportunities?
Afraid so.
Can I speak to opportunities for a moment?
Yes.
Okay. In terms of opportunities for English-speaking youth, there is the prospect of remote work, which they are accessing more and more frequently. Many students are actually using internship programs to subsidize their work for companies outside of Quebec, outside of Canada. That's an interesting trend. And also the fact that the labor market projection is that the current labor shortage will last for a whole generation should favor English-speaking youth entering the job market as much as anyone else. The priorities of Generation Y and Generation Z workers are now being reflected. Companies are actually adjusting their practices and policies to make their companies and organizations look more like what Generation Y and Generation Z workers want to see. The ability to negotiate salary, work-life balance, and engage in training programs that can advance their careers. So these are some opportunities of the current workforce. Again, we need to talk more about English-speaking youth's ability to access those opportunities. Thank you.
Adrienne, you're raising such important points. Thank you very much. We could go on all day. Now, I will give each other panelist 1 minute if they have something they would like to add or disagree with something Adrienne said. And we'll start with Christine. So I'll be strict about the time, Christine, so we can keep on track.
Okay.
So,
I'd like to definitely reinforce some of the things that Adrienne said. Our communities here, our Anglophone communities, tend to isolate themselves. They feel like it's not for them. It's not their community. They don't participate in, whether it's social activities, whether it's festivals, they don't participate in them because it's not their community. They don't have a tendency to incorporate themselves in the community. So they isolate themselves, which is disadvantage to them for sure. We talked about universities, programs in the regions. There's very few programs in the regions and at university level. And I've built a relationship with a partnership with Lucar here at my center, where we've put a room together for distance ed. So they use it for their students in French, and the dream and the hopes that someday we can build some partnerships with some Anglophone universities to start sharing those programs in the regions to help our region reach a higher level of education, to make it more accessible to our communities. So that's my dream. Anybody who can help me with that. So we need to build partnerships for our regions. So that's what I wanted to reinforce, Adrienne.
Thank you, Christine. And let's talk, because I work at Concordia, and maybe we can
please
do something. That's what these meetings are for. So let's get in touch. Now, John, do you have something to say in a minute in response to Adrienne's point?
Not particularly. I think both Adrienne and Christine raised great points. And in my opening remarks, I also kind of raised some points that might have touched on this question. So I don't really have much more to add to that. I think the points raised were great.
Okay.
Can I steal this minute?
You have, how about we give Angela her minute? We're supposed to move on to the second question in 1 minute. So I guess I have to say no. Angela.
I'll try to be quick. I would echo what Adrienne brought up about the challenges, and I would go back to what I was saying in my introduction about accessibility for our youth to have access to CEGEP and university programs that they're actually interested in, and to be able to continue those studies in English in the community where they would like to follow those studies. And as Christine was mentioning, we need to get more creative in how we're going to offer those opportunities to those students. We need to look at partnerships, like you mentioned, Christine. We need to look more, I think, to the online possibilities. And if I get an opportunity to, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I would leave that part at that, but I think there are opportunities to try to help some of the challenges that they are facing. We just need to get a little bit more creative in how we approach the solutions.
Fabulous. And Christine, it's your turn to talk, so you can sneak in what you were going to say before, but I have a targeted question for you.
Okay, well, it's one of the opportunities that Adrienne was working on, and like we were lucky enough in our region that our Emploi Quebec office is willing to fund some immersion programs for our clientele that have followed vocational trades in order to be better prepared for the job force. Our biggest challenge there is the student buy-ins. It's very difficult to get people to come take French courses in an intense fashion. So I just wanted to mention that. So my question, are you reading the question for me?
I was going to, so here goes. Kurt's 2021 report on English language vocational and technical education in Quebec found that there are gaps in the access to English language tech VOC programs in Quebec, particularly in regions. What is the role of vocational and tech training programs in addressing English speakers' employment challenges? How do we begin to address gaps and barriers to this? And we've just got around 2 minutes now, Christine.
All right, so I'll try to be quick. Well, I've been preaching this for some time now. I don't know how it works for the CEGEPs, but I think for your technical programs, Angela, it's the same as me. When we want to offer a program, Lorraine, we have to go through the Ministry of Education to ask for an authorization to do so. And part of the process is to get Emploi Quebec to give us their advice on the needs of our region. And that needs to change, because right now the way it's set up, it's basically the big centers that have to offer everything. And the regions, well, our needs are very limited. So it should be the provincial needs that are addressed, not the local needs. After all, there's mobility. It's not difficult. Teleworking is available. A lot of people will move for work anyway. So where to get your education shouldn't be as important as how many people have access to the education. So that needs to be looked at in a different angle so that we can offer more training overall in the province. Montreal can't do it all. They know they can't do it all. They're limited also, right? So we have to give opportunities. There's some buildings that are not at capacity in the regions, which could be used. It's not a very good use of investment, in my opinion. It's again, making hybrid programs. I completely agree with Angela. We need to look at more online, hands-on, also combined programming so that we can give more access to more people that are isolated. That's very important. We need to make part of every program French. I mean, there has to be more French included in the programming. The ratio would vary depending on the need of the industry, but I think it's a must, so that we can break all those barriers for the students. And we need to get more employer buy-in. They need to be more committed. I was able to do that here for my nursing program when there was this big rush last year. They didn't, the SIS didn't want to look at my students because they're Anglophone. So we went from there, from having many, many discussions to the point where he realized not only did he want them, but he was going to interview them in English so that he could know who's in front of them. And it was his responsibility afterward as an employer to continue the education of this, to work on their French language skills. So we went from, I don't even want them, to yes, I want them, and I will work with them ongoingly. So there's a lot of work to be done with our employees as well.
Thank you. So much being said that's so valuable, and I'm glad that someone is taking notes and will report on this conversation. Adrienne, in about a minute and a half, do you have a response to make to Christine?
Sure. I mean, I think Christine, for her comments, she gave very specific examples. I'm not sure that I can address how we begin to address the gaps and barriers in the access to vocational and technical training, but I can express the sentiment on behalf of my colleagues and the youth with whom we consult and their teachers, because we know from our work that the prospect of being able to get into a technical program is often a very strong driver for many, many young people to complete high school in the first place, or to return to school and get their GED in order to enter those technical training programs about which they'll feel passionate and can see a future that includes active participation in the workforce. So it's incredibly important. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne. John, do you have some comments to make? A couple minutes.
Sure. Just to say quickly that with a lot of the youth I've worked with, a lot of the time people are kind of either pretty scared to even apply to jobs that have French language requirements, even if they speak some basic level of French or French to some degree. So personally, I'm very curious with about innovative solutions and things such as learn as you earn, having an employer kind of understand the situation and try to help and play an active role in helping someone improve their French language skills while working. So so that's just an area that I have a great curiosity in, and I hope it can kind of be built upon. Yeah.
Thank you very much, John. Angela, have you something to add?
I would like to add on what Christine was mentioning. I think the importance of vocational and technical training is that these types of trainings offer the students very specific skill sets that can really help improve their employability. And they're short programs. Very often, some might be only 60 hours, some might be 900 or 1200 hours, which may seem like a lot of hours, but it really, in about a year and a half, person can walk away from that type of training with some very good skills that can either improve their employment situation or perhaps give them an opportunity to have a promotion within the organization that they already are. So it is really important for that sort of lifelong learning element or professional development. And I think that they can play a really important role in continuing to help people stay stimulated and up to date in their area or in their field.
Thank you, Angela. John, I'm going to turn to you now with the targeted question. Students who pursue post-secondary education have diverse profiles. They include parents, immigrants, people in precarious economic situations, racialized individuals, and mature workers. Furthermore, well, as you've already mentioned, French language barriers, can exacerbate or worsen some of the existing challenges that these students face. From your perspective, what are some solutions to address the intersectional barriers that I've just laid out facing these students?
Yeah, that's a very great question. And I wanted to start with the barrier of the French language. This applies to students, but even beyond those who are currently studying. Personally, a solution, as ambitious as it may sound, would be to make French learning and courses universally accessible to everyone living in Quebec and perhaps beyond. If people don't have the opportunity to learn French or can't afford to, this is a barrier that I see as gonna remain. And with online learning now being fairly common, it's not really inconceivable that the opportunity to learn French can be made possible for everyone in Quebec. For me, it's not a question of capacity, it's more of a question of priority. And it's not just governments, but as I mentioned, employers can also play a role in making this a reality. So I'm not going to repeat what I said about learn as you earn. Now, with regards to the other barriers, as the question itself suggests, solutions have to be intersectional, meaning that they have to take into account the different ways that different groups of people are facing barriers to education and employment. They have to take into account the nature of these barriers and the extent of them. And thus, policies and solutions need to be intersectionally informed. For that to happen, there is still, in my opinion, a need for research on these different identities and groups of people, the barriers they face, and how those barriers change if someone holds several identities as part of several groups. For instance, if we're talking about a racialized new immigrant who happens to live below the poverty line, we need to research not just how each of these identities may pose barriers in and of themselves, but when combined, what impact does that have on an individual? This is my understanding of what being intersectionally informed means. I also believe that we should take a rights-based approach to this research, and it's necessary to identify who the duty bearers are, that is, those who are responsible for protecting and ensuring the rights of others being identified, and who the rights holders are as well. It helps make it clearer who can do what. And lastly, we also need to be open and honest about these barriers and what's causing them. Are all of these coincidental? Is this just a regular problem in our society that came out of nowhere? In some cases, from my perspective, these barriers can be man-made. These are barriers that we have erected, for instance, capping enrollment at CEGEP or determining who's English and French and what rights they have. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have policies that in and of themselves create barriers. And of course, this is not divorced from politics. I don't know of any educational system in the world which is fully divorced from politics. For me, the answer to the question is it's fundamentally political, and it can't really be shied away from. So this is a question that I would love to hear a policymaker or decision maker in education also have a crack at answering. They're in a position to bring about solutions on a societal level or in a sectorial level, something that's not afforded to most people. I'll just be a last moment, Lorraine. I just wanted to say, let's keep that in mind because many of these barriers didn't fall out of the sky. And perhaps most importantly, for me, we can't really be scared to talk about these things. I don't accept that well-being and vitality of different students in Quebec, whether they're English speaking or not, or immigrants or not, is ever considered to be a taboo subject. So I thank all the co-panelists and even PERT for helping to advance these discussions.
John, you said the P word and I saw floating the thumbs up and clapping hands there on the side. So apparently a number of people in the group agree with you, and I can certainly say that I do. And thank you for bringing up those points. Adrienne, do you have something to say to respond to John's comment?
I mean, I would just mention that I find it interesting to watch the cascade of changes being brought about in terms of policy related to employment. An example would be the fact that the Liberals temporarily lifted the cap on off-campus work hours for international students, for example. And these are all brought about by the economic reality of the labor shortage. I think equity in hiring practices should be top of mind for all employers. We're seeing a a good trend in favor of that, but more needs to be done to sensitize employers. It's the responsibility is not entirely on the workers. It's heavily on the employers. We also talk a lot in our organization and outwardly about linguistic insecurity, the experience that English-speaking youth have when they're going for through the hiring process. English-speaking youth and youth who identify with multiple different communities are great on paper. When they get into an interview situation, they might be experiencing one particular kind of insecurity that doesn't necessarily mean that they are not a fantastic candidate for a job. We have to talk more about these insecurities, name them, put them into a box, and make sure that employers can identify them and say, I'm still looking at a fantastic candidate who's experiencing a particular kind of insecurity at this moment, given the high stress situation that an interview implies, and still consider them for the job that they are highly qualified to fulfill. We could talk more, but I support everything that John said, and we need to talk more about the responsibility of the employer when considering candidates.
Thank you, Adrienne. Christine, do you have comments to make?
Yeah, I agree with John. Like, when it comes to advocacy, it's important that we're smart about whose door we knock at when it's time to advocate for I call them my students because I work in a school, right? And I'll knock at different doors depending on what I'm trying to get done. And politically, anytime I have an opportunity, I definitely speak to the situations. I mean, they need our students. That's the reality, right? So they need to put more effort into doing what they need to do in order to put them to work. So, and I think when we approach it that way, I seem to get more success that way when we stress the point that we should be partners in order to get everyone on the job market that's available, especially someone who's a Quebecer. Their roots are already here. Your chances of keeping them are greater than someone else. So
interesting how we keep hearing, well, especially with Christine, the word partnership, another P word. That's clearly key to what's going on in this situation and also propose solutions. Thanks, Christine. And Angela, have you got a response to John's comments?
Yes, I do. I think that as institutions, we need to support our students who are living through those multiple types of barriers and obstacles that are put in front of them. So that support needs to be financial, it might be childcare, it might be access to the different help services, even academic support to help get them through, especially if they're not studying in their first or even their second language. But what we've seen at St. Lawrence is that it's not enough to have those services and to have the support network in place. You have to promote it. Students have to know that it's there, and then they have to know how and where to go and get it. So at the CEGEP level, we're talking about 17, 18, 19-year-olds who like the idea of help, but sometimes they have trouble navigating the system to find it. So we found we've grouped all of our professional help services in one area of the school. So physically, you walk into the wing, as we call it, and all of our help services are there. So this makes it easy for students to find people. It also allows it to be discreet. So a student can walk into the wing for multiple reasons, and they're not labeled with, I'm going to see the social worker, I have mental health issues. So it really allows them to find the services in a way that are comfortable for them. And then you need internally in the institutions, internal allies. So we spend a lot of time educating our teachers about what our professional help services can offer and where students go to get those services. So our teachers can encourage students to go and seek the help, or they can discreetly drop a name to one of our professionals and they'll reach out to make sure that the student is finding and seeking the resources that we need. So the whole community has to work together, but I think that support is really the key for those students once they're inside our organizations.
Thank you very much, Angela. And I love that notion of the wing where to lower stigma, to encourage that cross-fertilization of ideas and support. It seems so simple and obvious, right? But I'm going to be turning to you now again, Angela, with a targeted question. Here it is. English language educational institutions play an important role in preparing English speakers to enter the labor market. Obviously, you know that. How are English language educational institutions faring right now, and what kind of changes are needed?
Well, thank you for that, Lorraine. English language institutions, they're under pressure right now. Many of us, not all of us, but many of us are small. So naturally, we are trying to do more with less. And this has an impact on our human, material, financial resources. And we still have to run our institutions. So we still have to do all of the basic operations with sometimes less. As we say at St. Lawrence, we have one person per chair. So if we lose that person, things get complicated. As I mentioned in my other points today, it also limits the diversity that we can offer. Having the full scope of services or programs that we're able to offer, that can also have an impact at that level. The current labor market is also making it more and more difficult for our institutions, in the sense that it can be difficult to keep our employees. The public sector is not necessarily as attractive as it might have been even a couple of years ago. And then the ability to rehire when we do lose those people. So we have a few empty chairs right now at the CEGEP, and it's taking us months and months to fill them. So the pressure is then felt throughout the organization, because that has ripple effects. And John, you alluded to the new charter for the French language, and that of course is also adding pressure. The cap on the number of students for CEGEPs, we've learned that there will be a cap not only on regular day, but also in continuing education. So that will impact the type of vocational and technical programs that we can offer. And of course, then we're touching job security for our teachers and for our staff. And we know it's with the CEGEP level that we have further challenges that are coming with the courses that we have to add and that we have to develop in French. There's the additional burden, if I can say it that way, of translating all of our official documentation into French, and writing, emails and our internal communications in both languages. So I guess for changes, which is the second part of your question, Lorraine, I understand the need for French, and I support everything that Christine and John have alluded to as well, that there does need to be French integrated into the programs. But if there could be maybe separate guidelines within Law 14 for our public institutions that have been created for the English-speaking community, could we have a little, break from the need to translate all of our official documentation into English, when our public really, they want to read it in English. They're not going to go looking for it in French. It seems like a small change, but it would certainly alleviate some of the pressure. But I also think that our educational institutions can do more, as Christine was mentioning. We need to get more creative. We need to create more partnerships at all the different levels of education. So through our vocational, then through our technical, and all the way up to university, if we can have springboards that help people improve their employability, improve their skill set throughout their careers as workers in the labor market. I think that this would help the employability of the English-speaking population in the province of Quebec, and it would also hopefully help them feel like they are part of the Quebec community.
Excuse me. Thank you, Christine. Angela, sorry, my phone rang. I've got too many screens happening right now. Adrienne, do you have comments to make on Angela's presentation just now?
Not many. I think Angela is perfectly positioned, did a perfect job of presenting many of the challenges faced by educational institutions. I would add that, given the labor shortage and the fact that Angie is having issues at her institution to fill key positions. We're asking, in an ideal world, we would ask universities to take on more in terms of responsibility for the transition from the education sphere to the workforce. For example, programs where companies partner with universities to create programs to ease the transition. I mean, there are great programs like that in place, but again, we're putting a greater burden on universities as well as CEGEPs to do that, to help with that transition. It's just an enormous challenge. That's all I'll add. If we're asking for universities and CEGEPs to do more to ease that transition, that requires human resources to put into place those programs, to create those internship opportunities and the partnership building that internships require. It's an enormous challenge, and thank you for speaking to it so well, Angie.
Thanks, Adrienne. I heard someone say recently we're putting an impossible burden on our CEGEPs now. There's just so much going into what we expect. Christine, do you have anything to add to Angela's comment?
Well, I do. Definitely. Look, I completely agree with Angela. We're wasting money and time and energy on this, translating into French and making sure everything's available for who and for what. Some things just don't make sense to me when we're already so stretched out. Why would we waste our energy? So, we have to learn to build capacity from within. I think, and I keep saying it, the partnerships, like we can do more just together. We can do so much more already. Like today, I've made some links already, to maybe be able to offer to give more accessibility to university in our regions, right? So we need to lean more on each other for a lot of things. We don't tend to do it. We tend to be like our communities. We isolate ourselves, and I say it because I see it more because I'm Francophone. I was raised French, and I went to English school. I'm a product of vocational education. That's how I worked on my English and went from there. So I'm able to see it from both sides. And, I can really say that sometimes I feel like the Anglophones don't feel like they deserve the same share as the Francophones, but we totally do. We've earned it. We've worked for it. It's ours, just like it's theirs. We have to ask for more, be our own advocates as well for our clientele and for our population. But we need to lean more on each other.
Thank you, Christine. And I love that you explained that you were a Francophone, and you say we when you talk about Anglophones. It shows the complexity and of what we're talking about when we talk about language and language groups and so on. And John, have you got comments to make on Angela's presentation?
It was a great response, not just from Angela, but Adrienne's and Christine's as well. So I don't really have too much to say, except for maybe echoing a bit of Christine in the sense of I think I don't see kind of what benefit right now is coming about really framing this as English or French or kind of having even our institutions as an English institution or French institution, and kind of excluding groups and deciding like budgets based on the language this population speaks most. So any kind of steps in the direction of kind of trying to break down this divide, this linguistic divide, if you want to call it that, which a lot of people are already moving from or getting sick of, I'm in favor of.
Thank you. What an amazing panel, and what insights and what knowledge in the room. It's really humbling and wonderful to see. We're going to turn now to a general discussion among the panelists, and after that, those of you in the audience, I'll turn to some questions in the Q&A. So I can see there are at least 5 questions in Q&A, so I'll just ask one short question for all the panelists. To turn to a very positive note. What is one successful or helpful initiative you've heard of or you would like to see? to improve student retention and ability for students to complete their education in Quebec and enter their desired careers here. So a best practice or a wish. And how about we just take 1 minute each? I'll go in the usual order. Let's see. So John just spoke, so I'll start with Angela. Do you have one thing you would like to see? In 1 minute, let's hear your dream.
Well, my dream would be to continue some of the things, well, one of the elements that we see here at St. Lawrence. And just like in high school, one of the ways that students succeed better and the retention is improved is if they get involved in their school. If they join a sports team or sociocultural activities, if they join a club, if they're in the student association. And we've seen at St. Lawrence in the past 2 years that 40% of our students are involved either as an athlete or in the sociocultural activities that we offer. So we're small, but we're obviously doing something right. And we're able to respond to students when they come and see us and they say, I'd like to start a club about this. We try to make it possible as much as we can in order to give students that sense of belonging and that way to find their inner community within our greater community. So that I think is something that we need to pay attention to, that in our educational institutions, there's the academic side, which is very important, but there's the other side that we also have the responsibility of developing in our students. It's their other talents and their other interests outside of their classes. And that's what helps keep them anchored in the education system a little bit longer.
Wow, Adrienne, beat that.
I can't. Lorraine, it's good practice to ask, not to ask one panelist to beat the other panelist at something in the middle of a conference. I'll try.
I was just kidding. We go way back, Adrienne and I.
I know. Thank you, Angie. Okay. So the question was, in our own work experience, what have we seen that have been great programs that have a positive effect on retention? Overall. So I would mention that there are several federal government work programs that are excellent for English speaking youth and that our English speaking youth community accesses regularly. The Young Canada Works program, the Canada Summer Jobs program offers opportunities for youth to have a first-time job experience, which is so valuable. The Odyssey program as well. We certainly hope those programs will be continued by the federal government in the new action plan for official languages. There are programs such as the one called the Beat the Odds internship program at Concordia University that are specifically meant for youth who may face multiple barriers to employment based on the many communities with which they identify, etc., and their histories. Those kind of programs that fully fund youth to have job experiences help community organizations like ours fill our positions, and we also learn from those experiences. Angela mentioned student societies and associations. Absolutely. Youth who get involved in their school in some way or another stay involved more often. And we also know that student societies and associations are often the best communicators of job opportunities to those English-speaking youth. That's an incredibly important role that they're playing. Universities create networking events and summits throughout the year that are incredibly important for youth to make their first contacts with potential employers and build a network. Also, we have to give a nod to community organizations. Community organizations play a huge role, creating career fairs, projects, programs, and initiatives where youth get to see themselves take as leaders in their communities, taking leadership roles in their communities through these projects and initiatives. And many of those career fairs and other partnerships would not exist without community organizations playing an important role. So those are some of the things that I've seen through my own work that support employment prospects for young people and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne. Next, I lost track of the order, but it's okay. John, one best practice or wish.
Sure, it's a bit tough just from my position, working not in the post-secondary environment, but to one thing we've done as a community organization is create a kind of job matching venture, if you will, or program aimed at matching job seekers from particular communities that have barriers in entering the labor force, and matching them with employers. And the way we try to do it is, sensitizing employers to the challenges facing this group of job seekers. We already talked about the challenges employers are currently facing, and at the same time having kind of for the job seeker side, kind of offering them the resources that could be helpful in terms of either upskilling them or having them find the right kind of match in regards to an employer. So collaboration between community organizations or other organizations and employers and the university as well, or post-secondary institution. For me, I see a lot of promise in these kinds of programs. The one we're doing at the BCRC is fairly new, so I can't really talk too much about its impact yet. But I think this is just a means for helping people better integrate into the job market here.
Thank you, John. Very interesting community-based initiative. And Christine?
Yeah, one of the things that we do to agree with Angela, it's very, very important to support our clientele, our students. And the Ministry of Education has put in place some special measures for us in the adult sector. The measures 15161, volets 1 through 4, where you can go get money to work on perseverance. So we do that, or literacy. So we do that. Well, I apply on 6 measures every year. I've been doing that for 6 years. So I go get myself like a good chunk of money, between 200 and 300,000 a year, to work on to provide, whether it's snacks. I mean, we're at that level here where food is fundamental for our clientele. You can't learn if you're hungry. So we feed them, we give them all kinds of services that create an attachment to the center. They have to know that we care and we're their advocates. We have to show them that we're their advocates and that, we care for them. So that's what we do. That's our best practice here.
How amazing that it comes to that, Christine, and how important.
And partnerships with our community organizations, absolutely, ladies, that you're totally right. Like, some of these measures demand that you have partnerships with community organizations. So I partner with CAS, I partner with our Family Ties to do all kinds of projects with them.
Obviously, we have more to say than minutes allow. We have 1 minute left. So I'm going to ask Pert something. There are some excellent questions in the Q&A. I know Pert is taking note of this, of our panel, and I'm going to ask Pert to make a note. So I apologize to people in the audience. We don't have time to address the Q&A. I'll ask Pert to make note of the questions and to distribute them to our panelists, and maybe we can come up with a way for people to be for some way for if any of the panelists have things to add to address that and share it with the people in the conference today. Nick Salter is going to close up the panel. So I just will say thank you from the bottom of my heart to the panelists and also to the audience members for your time and your ideas. And now I will turn the floor over to Nick, who will provide closing remarks.
Well, thanks, Lorraine. Thanks so much. And thanks to all our panelists as well. That was a great panel, and enjoyed hearing from you all. And Lorraine, absolutely, we will take note of those questions and see what we can do. But more than anything, it just tells me that this is the beginning of a conversation, or perhaps the middle of a conversation, and there are many more conversations to be had as a group around these kind of topics. And we look forward to doing this kind of event again with our partners. And also we're looking forward to hopefully holding an in-person event with partners, most likely in the spring, but stay tuned for that. But yeah, it's my pleasure, absolutely, to provide you with a brief recap of what we heard today. So if you remember early this morning, we had our Learning French for the Workforce in Quebec panel. We heard how many English speakers or linguistic minorities have a strong interest in learning the French language. And approaching this desire with understanding, with empathy, and with positive reinforcement is actually the best way to drive language learning. We heard that many employers recognize the advantage of language learning for their employees, and under the right conditions are willing to have their employees learn language on the job. And we also heard a lot about flexibility for program delivery, which needs to be adapted to the specific needs of the learner and also the needs of the employer. This means adapting vocabulary and training to specific industries. And I think we were encouraged not to see language learning courses as these kind of defined square boxes, but rather places where there's often an opportunity for creativity and innovation and how French language learning is delivered. We also heard, again this morning, from our panelists to tackle the issue of French in Quebec's professional orders. What I found particularly striking was the discussion on the importance of collaboration between government, the education sector, and professional orders. It was made clear that there needs to be kind of systemic changes that will enable institutions to better support French language learners entering regulated professions. I also appreciated hearing about the important role that professional orders could play in making language training part of the kind of continuous learning and professional development process for professionals. And the importance of creating a variety of language learning approaches to fit the different learning needs of professionals, whether it's on-the-job language training or bridging programs to help them integrate into French language work environments. And obviously, we just had this amazing panel with lots of questions and lots of discussion and clearly lots of interest. It was thought-provoking, to hear that Quebec's English-speaking youth face the challenge that as they graduate, decide whether they decide to stay or decide to go and leave the province. I absolutely loved the John's. I think John was on this one. The learn as you earn. I absolutely love that. So employers are starting to shift and to recognize their responsibility in accommodating recently graduated English-speaking students. Examples of them adapting hiring practices and understanding the need to help these new workers to improve their French language training on the job. It was really heartening to hear Christine's example of this. And then there's the importance of building intersectionality, not only into our solutions and programs, into our community organizations, but also into our research, our thinking, and our hiring from the get-go. And that involves seeking out diverse candidates, but also involves understanding the support mechanisms they might require, for example, childcare. And vocational technical training is always such an important, relatively short way for English speakers to improve their employability and is key for lifelong learning and professional development. So these are just a few of our thoughts, a lot more to digest, and we'll obviously try to get the videos online and share more content with you and keep this conversation going. But it's now my pleasure to turn it over to James Hughes, PERT's president, a person whose implication in the employment sphere for English speakers in Quebec dates to his role as the founding president of Yes Employment and Entrepreneurship. So Jim, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Nick, and hi everyone. It's been just tremendous to be a part of this virtual activity. This is not an easy environment to bring people together, but I think we can all agree that we have found a way to be together and to learn together, and I think that's amazing. And I don't have a lot to say. I do have a few perhaps policy-oriented comments to make that may be helpful for us to think about moving together forward into the future. But just a couple of initial thoughts. I love the way this whole event has kind of been teed up. But Bill Flock, you remember right off the top, was talking about the new infrastructure that we have as a community that we didn't have before. That brings, amongst other things, brings us together in events like this. PERT is part of that new infrastructure. It didn't exist 2 years ago, and to talk in these intersectoral ways in the way we are right now is really a breath of fresh air. And it's not obviously just PERT. There's other new institutions, new initiatives going on. There's almost a sense that we're calling out to each other in our community from one corner of the province to the other. Here I'm pointing to the map of Quebec right now, all over the place, that we are one, we are here, we will stay, we will survive, and hopefully we will thrive. I think it's possible. We're an incredibly tenacious community, incredibly diverse community. And I think together, I think it's almost like we heard summarizing through many of these presentations and panels, that that is the pathway to indeed being full partners in the building of this province we call our own. Okay, so and indeed a lot of work has been done, but here are some things I think we have to think about really seriously in terms of the going forward. And John said, the P word. There's a lot of politics out here, but we have the capacity to be political without being partisan, without being, I think, exaggerated. I think we have a lot to bring to the table. And here's some of the things that I think we should absolutely expect legitimate and reasonable in our dialogue with government going forward. The first thing is Francisization Quebec. It needs to meet the needs of our community. And we need to be engaged in that process. The governance of that new institution is the first question. Is our voice going to be included in the development of the kinds of programs that our communities need to indeed survive and thrive? We need to ensure that targeted language training and accompaniment programs are deployed to ensure individuals with the professional qualifications and certifications get the assistance they need to pass professional order French language exams. A bit of a no-brainer, right? We're in a crunch for these types of professions. There is a supply, there is a demand, but so we just got to put the two together, and these are the ways to do it. We also need to make sure that English speakers are able to properly access English language employment services, whether delivered by our own organizations or by community partners willing to hire bilingual staff and offer bilingual services. It's great to hear the example of the onboarding that some employers are doing in that regard, because they have to, and it's not that expensive. And wow, you may have employees for years and years to come if you do it properly. We also want to see government lead by example and develop the programs and pathways to ensure our community is represented at the same proportion in the public sector as we are in the population. How cool would that be? You know, the Welsh Institute, Donna, who we heard yesterday, talked about wanting 1 million Welsh speakers. So what about that target? They actually set a target as a minority community in Great Britain about the number of people that are actually speaking a language. Should we think about setting a target for the number of people we want working in the Quebec Civil Service? Maybe in the federal civil service too. Everyone knows it's under 1% right now, right? We are 13% of the population of Quebec. And that is not a small gap, folks. That's a massive gap. So should we be targeting within the next 5 years representing 5% of the Quebec workforce? I think it's a legitimate question that we should ask ourselves. And frankly, we have that infrastructure now to ask ourselves, okay? And we need to develop and implement bridging programs, work integrated learning, internships, mentorships, and all these other types of transitional types of machinery that makes it all work. We look forward to continue working with the SRQEA and our new Minister of Finance, Eric Girouard. It's not to be understated that the Minister of Finance is now responsible for the SRQEA. You know, this is frankly good news, bringing an economic point of view to the sociological and linguistic issues that we're facing. Because at the end of the day, the English-speaking community is an amazing resource, always has been for this province, is in massive development, and is putting up its hand to say, what about us? And so to have that type of spokesperson for the community, I think is a very interesting move on the part of the government. I would say a positive one in general. Okay. So let me just leave it at that, folks. Thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you for being part of this event. Hopefully we'll have a lot of other ones. For sure, rendezvous November 2023 at the latest, but I suspect Nick and team, and it's a great team at PERT. They really are amazing. Thank you to them. Maybe have some other events in store for you in between now and then. So thanks again for being part of this, and à la prochaine.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks so much. So I also wanted to thank again our keynote, thank all of our panelists for being here with us yesterday and today. But as usual, there's a team behind the scenes. I don't know if they're going to be too shy to put on their cameras. Hopefully they aren't. But I wanted to thank our translators. So Sheena and Pascal, thank you. Big applause to you. I wanted to thank Alexandra for the logistics and tech support. Sarah on our team who coordinated this event, she couldn't be with us here this afternoon, but she played a huge role. And also thank you to Maria. Maria, I hope you're out there and we can maybe see your face. Maybe she's too shy to, but thank you, Maria. All the beautiful graphics you saw in newsletters and all that work, pulling us all together, happened from Maria. So thank you. And thank you, Sarah. You were all stars. And thanks to our guests for spending the last 2 days with us. We appreciate it. And as I said, we do want to do something in person. I'm glad, we avoided the snowstorm yesterday. That might have created some issues with this virtual format, and we'll continue to do some virtual events as well, but do hope to do some next events in person so we can all gather together and eat delicious food, as Christine said, and gather as a community. So thank you so much. Thanks to everyone.